Alright, welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a cheap airbrush to paint a computer monitor and make a really cool steampunk thing. We're also going to use an epoxy resin called art resin, which is a really safe, clear, thick gloss clear coat. Alright, so here, let's get started. I've got my computer monitor that I got from a friend of mine who fixes computers and just had some spares. And he said, hey, let's paint these things and like make a computer art gallery. So I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. I'd never done it before, so this is my first attempt at doing it. So I drew a little sketch on it. You know, I taped it off so that I wouldn't get any on the sides. And I drew a little sketch. And then I went in there with a little white paint and I just kind of doodled in the areas where I think the eyes and lips and, you know, some areas that are going to be brighter. Turned out this wasn't necessary at all because it all got removed later. I learned a lot about painting on this particular surface. The paint doesn't stick in the way that, like, if you put another layer on top, you'll still see the layer on the bottom. It all just combines, and so there was no point in doing this, but it at least gave me an idea of where my stuff was going to go. So then I added a little black paint in the areas where there was going to be some shadow. And I added a little bit of brown too, because I wanted just a tiny little bit of an organic look. And then I started to add a little white on top, so that I had something to work with. So just a dusting of white on the face and the hair. Then I went in there with my palette knife and I carved out what are going to be like her hairs, kind of like hairs, wires kind of things. And some weird, strange designs, like maybe mechanical parts that are connected to her. I just kind of doodled them in and I scraped off paint, and basically what I'm exposing there is the monitor underneath, which is black. And I took some out of her eyes too, her pupils. I want her pupils to be darker. And I made all kinds of hair. Just with my palette knife, or you can call it a paint spatula. I know a lot of you aren't familiar with these techniques for airbrush, and that's because they come from the spray paint art community. And I've spent a lot of time modifying spray paint art techniques for use with a cheap airbrush so that you can have lots of fun with it. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a sheet of poster board and I'm brushing it over the paint that I have already on my paper. And this is an ancient spray paint art technique. And what it's going to do is it's going to texture the paint in such a way that you could never do with a brush. It's going to create a really interesting, intricate texture that I think is going to work really well for her face. Alright, so I'm drawing with my spatula anywhere I think a little hair or wire or something weird might go, just clearing out those spaces. And now I'm spraying some white paint, just a dusting of white paint on top of her face, because I want that to be a little brighter, and I'm just blotting it with that paper. And I'm going to do a little bit more of that white just to make sure I've got enough to work with, because I want there to be some bright spots, because I'm going to be removing paint. So what I'm removing paint here is called a magic eraser. You can find these in your grocery store. They're used for some kind of cleaning product. They're a very smooth white sponge. And as this paint dries, it becomes easier to remove. And there's a sweet spot between wet and dry where you have a lot of control. So at first you might notice that it's hard to get the paint off. Just be patient. You'll keep testing it, and there will be a time when the paint comes off really easily and you can remove some of that paint where those eyes are, any dark spots that you want in the face or whatever it is that you're drawing. And the areas where I drew with my palette knife and my paint spatula, the paint comes off really easily. So if there's a little white paint in there, it's really easy to clear it off, because the paint that I just applied is wetter than the paint that's been on there for a while. So it'll wipe off real quick and it'll leave what was there, so you'll get a nice sharp line. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. Use your palette knife to draw the lines, and then you can add a little paint on top and remove some of it with a magic eraser or a kitchen sponge or whatever it is you like to work with. Maybe even a rag. Get different textures with all kinds of different things to rub with. So I've decided that I'm clearing all the dark spots, and some of those dark spots are around the edges. So I'm leaving some dark around the edges so it looks like it's framed by darkness. So I'm going around the edges and kind of selectively clearing little spots, leaving others, brushing my magic eraser sponge over it, and removing little bits of paint that are inside the lines I've drawn with my palette knife. I'm leaving the rest. And that's going to get me some interesting textures that I can use as a background. And now I can go in there with some paint on a brush and just kind of tidy this up, like her upper lip. Make that a little clearer where that's going. A shadow under her lip. Maybe put a little bit of shadow in the edges of her lip too, because that makes a nice sensual mouth. I'm drawing the little nose holes where they go, a little nose shadow, kind of make that face start to pop out of the matrix that we've created with patterns. Now, when I put that white on and I brushed the poster board over it, I created a cool texture, and it's kind of an interesting mottled texture, so it looks kind of Borgish, you know, kind of spooky. And then if we add a little bit of detail to that, as you'll see later, it's going to be very cool. Now that black is just the most tiniest bit darker than the monitor itself, so I'm using that to add some dark centers to the middle of the eye, and anywhere I want, like at the top, a little bit of accent, and I'm adding some lines. Maybe they could be little wires or little hairs on her face. We'll see. But anyway, all the negative space, all the dark areas, I'm filling that in first, and then I'm going to go in and highlight. Make sure those eyebrows are in place. This is just basically drawing a face. There's some skill involved in knowing where the lips go and the eyes go and all of that. But if you don't have that skill, get yourself a picture of a face that you like and kind of copy it, kind of half copy it, just so that you know where things go. I'll probably make a video about how to draw a face and how to draw bodies and stuff like that later on. But right now, just improvise and see what happens for you. I filled in her lower lip there with a little bit of white paint to make it pop out a little bit more, starting to put a little light inside those eyes. I just put 2 dots of white paint inside those eyes, start to make them a little glowy, a little ghoulish, staring back at me from inside the computer. An interesting thing in painting on this computer monitor, the paint seems to fade a little bit after you apply it, so I'm going back in there and adding highlights on top of highlights. It may be that it's just because the way my paint is mixed. Check out the other paint mixing video. There's one in the Spray Paint Art Secrets channel, and I'll put another one in the Airbrush channel. But if it's not here when you're watching this video and you want to know how I mix my paints, go to Spray Paint Art Secrets YouTube channel, and there's a video about how I mix my paints for Airbrush. Basically, I mix acrylic paints and Windex. So it makes it so it does fade a little bit. I'm adding some highlights, and notice I'm just dabbing those on a little bit because I've already got this really cool texture on the face. So I want to work with that. I want to bring that out. So I don't want to put like broad strokes on. I want to go with that texture, and that texture has all kinds of little dots. So I'm dabbing on some white paint. Wherever I want to highlight, I'll dab on a bunch of dots. And the face is starting to come out, starting to look like a face. And I'm adding some bright areas in her hair as well. Maybe it's almost like lightning coming off her face, or we don't know. She's like a computer mystery staring at us from the void saying, check your Facebook, check your Facebook. Don't go out of the house, check Facebook. So I'm continuing to layer highlights on. I like some nice bright spots on the lips to contrast with the darker upper lip. And I'm putting little dots down at the bottom. Maybe she's got like a spiky collar on. Brightening up those eyes because they faded a little bit. I love making the nice sensual lips. Notice I'm pulling down little lines because, you know, we have little lines on our lips if you look at them closely. Okay, so that's her face. And I'll just add a few little details to the background, maybe a little planet up there, or a planetoid. And I've got a circle cut out, and I sprayed a little black on one side, a little white on the other side. Made a little planet, made a tiny little one down in the other corner, and you can see the planet's kind of soaking in a little bit. It's like the paint kind of absorbs and combines something about the surface of the monitor, but that's okay, it's interesting. So I'm just adding a few more adornments with just some white paint, a little detail. And the hair, basically this is improvisation. I'm working with what happened all by itself. I'm sure yours will come out differently, and you'll be drawing different faces, because the faces that we draw often represent faces that we have inside of us in some way. So everybody's is going to be different, and it'll take you in a different direction, and that's a good thing. So I'm adding a little black around her pupils. So I know that the blackest area is right next to the brightest area, and that helps those pupils to be sort of the focus of attention, so we can really see that face staring back at us. I'm giving her pretty brows. Even though she's a computer ghoul, she's got very pretty eyebrows. And I'm adding a little black around her face to make sure that the contrast between the shadow underneath her cheekbones and between that and her hair is nice and dark, so that her face takes on some substance. And I can add black to any areas where I feel like there's just a little bit too much ambiguity, or I want some contrast. And I'm outlining those circles with black to see what that does. Maybe it'll make them pop a little more. And maybe I'll put a few little weird designs on as well, like with just some white dots, and see what happens. So I'm just playing with this, really just improvising. I put like a little white, like a little ball cup or something, and then like a couple of dots, and I don't know what this is going to be, but the cool thing is that I've got some computer parts that I'm going to glue on it. So whatever is on here is going to go underneath some brighter colored stuff. So I'm not actually going to see all of this. That's my plan anyway. If you're planning to just paint the computer monitor and not glue anything on it, then be more careful than I'm being here. If you put too much paint on, you could go in with a sponge and take it off, which is what I just did there. There's too much blobby white paint on the top, so I took it off. I made some little dots around my circle there. I don't know what that is. Some kind of interesting board part or something. Transmitter, I don't know. And finally, a little brightness and sort of like a computery headdress she's got. Little implants on her head. And there we go. Let's peel off our newspaper and see what we've got there. That's pretty cool, staring back at me from my monitor screen. Alright, so what's the next step to make this a piece of art? Well, we need our resin. In this case, I'm going to use art resin, which is an epoxy resin from the company called Art Resin. And I talk about this in another video on the channel. Basically, this is a very safe resin. You know, no fumes in the air. It's you know, you don't want to massage yourself with it, obviously, but you don't need to wear a mask with it. It's got no volatile organic compounds in it that are going to be in your air. It's from a company called Art Resin, and I like it. So I put it all over my computer monitor, where I've glued on a few parts that my friend gave me with some super glue. And then I covered it up with the art resin, spread it around. Now you got to do this on a level surface or you'll have a problem. And then I let it dry overnight, and check it out. It's a work of art. It's way cool. I love the way the black and white of the face contrasts with the colored computer parts. And it's kind of steampunky in my opinion. And I like this idea, and I think I'm going to flow with it and see what kind of interesting things I can create. And we're going to make like a computer art gallery here in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, where I am at the moment. So I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial and that you give it a try. And I would love to see your interesting things that you make, and let me know if this helps you. So subscribe to our channel and go to airbrushpaintingsecrets.com to get all kinds of interesting new kinds of airbrush lessons. We've got some free stuff for you besides this, and some really cool techniques that are taken from the world of spray paint art that will let you paint waves and landscapes and all kinds of things in minutes with a super cheap airbrush, which I show you everything you need to know about how to set it up and have an amazing time and be a professional artist. So check it out at airbrushpaintingsecrets.com and subscribe, and let me know how it goes. Ciao!